right. So let me take that question to Sujan, who is a China expert and knows and understands China really well. You heard what Raja said, and the question really is, can the geopolitics trump geography? Can, the neighbors have real grievances, he said. They also have real options. So what is China's influence in this troubled neighborhood? How much should we worry about it? Sujan.
Thanks, Ajay. Let me begin by actually recalling a book which many of us might have come across, Robert D. Kaplan's book, The Revenge of Geography. So the main point here is that though globalization has reduced the tyranny of distance and geography, geography, in fact, is a very compelling vector in the evolution of geopolitics, and it remains so. When you look back to some of the great thinkers of the past, you have the example of Sir Halford Mackinder, who also spoke about the heartland theory and control of the heartland. In his case, of course, he was referring to what is today referred to as the Eurasian landmass, where a lot is happening in Ukraine and elsewhere. Control of the heartland allows you control of the rimland, or so to speak, eventually control of Asia, Africa, the peripheral areas, and that gives you greater control over what's happening in what he called the world island. If you speak of Alfred Mahan, he spoke of the importance of the geography of the Indian Ocean, that being the key to the 7 oceans, that being an ocean, the control of which would give a country a chance to dominate Asia. And if you take the South China Sea, you have the example of the 9-dash line, which was actually curated by a part-time geographer by the name, a Chinese geographer by the name Pai Mei Chu, sitting in Beijing in 1933. He was spooked by the expeditions undertaken by a French captain, France then being a preeminent power in the South China Sea. And this captain, Georges Mesmer, had actually gone and planted the French flag on 9 different islands in 1933, spooking Beijing. And this part-time geographer, self-taught geographer, decided that all geography, all map-making should be out of love for the nation. He made a map. And that map, sui generis, became the 9-dash line, the cow's tongue, the U-shaped line, etc. So remember that geography is extremely important, and we live in a very volatile neighborhood. But I cannot accept the fact that we are in a unique period where our geography, our neighborhood is highly disturbed. In fact, it's cyclical in nature. I don't think there's been a single decade where India has gone by without facing challenges from the neighborhood, too numerous for me to outline here. But it's very important to have a broad consensus in any neighborhood on the rise of any power. So in other words, for a rising power like India, it's important to have a certain degree of consensus. It also helps to have intra-South Asian trade, for example, which is abysmally poor in our case. In the case of China, there was a certain consensus in the neighborhood that stemmed from the physical presence of overseas Chinese, a lot of capital in their hands, in their respective economies, whether they were in Hong Kong or Singapore or Malaysia or Taiwan or Indonesia, and they contributed to China's rise. Having said that, let me also say that, you can't choose your neighborhood. You can choose your friends, but you really can't choose your neighborhood. And unless you claim to have a Monroe-like doctrine, which seeks to exclude the presence of other powers, it's virtually a waste of time to try and, cry over unduly over what's happening in the neighborhood. Really, the focus should be on what you can do to manage its impact on your security, your economic development. In fact, undue interference in the neighborhood may have, counterproductive results, because it's usually seen as interference in the affairs of smaller countries. That being said, I feel that the very definition of neighborhood has undergone change. In fact, we ourselves are responsible for these expanding definitions of the neighborhood. Don't we say today that India is part of a much wider region known as the Indo-Pacific? So we are basically propagating a theory whereby we say that what happens in the Indian Ocean has a direct impact on the Pacific Ocean and all the intervening spaces in between. We are all linked, whether it's through trade or technology or terrorism or territorial differences, the sea lines of communication. So the definition of South Asia is also undergoing change. This is a neighborhood which is today shared not only by India, but by a number of countries in that broader definition of the Indo-Pacific. In other words, there are other major powers that are also considering South Asia increasingly as part of their bailiwick. One key example is China. When China's meteoric rise as an economic power has also led ineluctably to greater militarization, unilateralism, and the use of coercion to achieve its own ends. China thinks that South Asia is a very logical and integral part of its neighborhood. The problem here is that there are existing powers, stakeholders in South Asia, who do not see the Chinese presence, A, as traditional stakeholder, it's new, B, it is disruptive, C, it comes in without transparency, it is very opaque. We know Chinese capacities. We can all write a little treatise on the Chinese economy, the Chinese military, but we have no idea about intentions and motivations. And that requires a dialogue. In our neighborhood, I think it is important to understand that you cannot necessarily go toe-to-toe with others. It is a futile exercise to try and prevent neighbors from having relations with others. The key point here should be, what can India do to match up to the expectations that the smaller neighbors have of their own aspirations, their developmental impulses, connectivity, infrastructure, capacity building. And there I think it is incumbent on India to pick and choose, to play to its strengths, to actually create corpuses through lines of credit, including for defense, to work on the basis of the comfort level of neighbors without going into a cage fight with larger entities, larger economies, who also consider South Asia increasingly, much to our chagrin, but it's a fact. It is part of their neighborhood as well. So if we can do this, if we can accomplish this part, we will be able to better meet the challenge of instability and disruption in our neighborhood. And I think the first and foremost requirement there would be to ensure a peaceful periphery, stability on our borders, ensure that there is an economic and developmental impulse in our border regions to prevent migration, vacation of these border villages towards city centers, make sure that our border people have something more than simply relying on orders placed by the army and the paramilitary forces for their sustenance. Create tourism, create certain, independent economic options for them to strengthen our border areas. Then you also need to ensure that the private sector invests heavily in Atmanirbhar Bharat, ensure that there is greater skilling. Eventually, India, if it emerges as a big economic power, will have to go into large-scale, lower-cost manufacturing. Also do a fair bit of value addition. And Atmanirbharta in Bharat is not... Atmanirbhar Bharat is not really an autarkic concept. It is a concept that allows enough space to work with foreigners, to bring in people in terms of TOT, in terms of JVs, etc., in order to enhance our own capacities, value addition that we can make, so that we become more competitive in terms of global supply chains. And lastly, I would say political consensus is vital. There's no point in basically criticizing policies for the sake of opposing a government. If there is merit in a policy, it leads to economic development, we should all make efforts to build better political consensus in the country.
Okay, thank you. So let me take this seminal question to all the other panelists, and which is essentially that this new world of plurilaterals and minilaterals and alphabet soups and acronyms of different organizations, how does India navigate them for the India story? To take advantage, Sujan, I'll start with you. To take advantage of this changing world and the global supply chains, global value chains, how does India, what would be the 2 or 3 things you would recommend India should do in this newer plurilateral world to get benefits for itself?
Look, however much the multilateral order stands eroded, globalization is a genie that cannot be put back into the bottle. So India, as a big power with many aspirations and on a high growth trajectory with increasingly stronger global presence, will have to work with like-minded partners. The United Nations is not a very great option at this stage for India because India is not part of the, however dysfunctional it may be, the UN Security Council. It does not have the kind of role it should have in multilateral development banks or in the international financial institutions, regardless of the fact that its economy today is bigger than that of Great Britain, for example. And so, what is it that India can do to ensure that it is in tandem with and convergent with others in order to occasion its own rise and further its interests? When I look at the neighborhood, I think SAARC appears what it is, dead as a dodo. India, therefore, looks askance towards the east at BIMSTEC. But BIMSTEC, however attractive it is, it also has certain difficulties because of the turmoil that we see towards our east, not the least in Bangladesh, but further afar in Myanmar. And therefore, there are certain limits to that. When you look at the SCO, I find that the presence of countries such as Pakistan, China, also limit the kind of cooperation we can generate on a key issue such as terrorism, for example, for definitions differ. And there is obviously, Pakistan there, which has a totally different view of what we would regard as a threat. The BRICS, in my view, personal view, is slightly overrated. The reason being that there are fundamental issues between India and China. It's not as if each of those economies is in the top 5 or 10. At the best of times, Russia, even with a war-fueled economy, is still nearly half of India's GDP. And I don't think we are going to get the technologies that we seek from Saudi Arabia and Iran, and certainly not from Ethiopia. So the issue here is, what is the BRICS really today? Is it just an empty chamber in which we want to hear echoes of the past? Its total economic strength without the expansion is around $27.5 trillion US dollars. With the expansion, you have been able to add a mere 3 trillion to that. So it's about 30 or 31 trillion. The biggest of that is contributed by one single country called Saudi Arabia, about 1.1 or 1.2 trillion dollars. But look at the G20. I think the G20 has a lot of potential because it's a level playing field. There's no veto power there. The G7 is present. The P5 is present. We have, in fact, the important original BRICS also present out there. So isn't that a much better option to try and see what we can make of that? More fundamentally, I think our interests lie in working together with our Quad partners. For when you look at the themes there, critical and emerging technologies, infrastructure, connectivity, health, space, cyber, it's very clear that India should be focusing its attention on key partners such as the United States of America, Japan, especially, even Australia. And I think we should try and take that as far as we can. I also want to emphasize that, and this was mentioned by Raja, that the mineral security partnership, for example, is extraordinarily important today if you want to achieve your 2030 clean energy goals of having 500 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. Now, if you don't have the critical minerals in place, there are 30 of them identified, and 10 of which are very critical, where India is 100% dependent on imports. There are only 14 countries that have signed up to the Mineral Security Partnership. I think a lot more needs to be done there to get more like-minded countries to be part of that initiative, because the Mineral Security Partnership also has implications for what we call deep seabed mining, the International Seabed Authority, which also needs to look at some of these critical issues, because where is that next lot of critical minerals and rare earths and all going to come from? The continental part is all monopolized. It's in the hands of a few. In fact, it's like putting the fox in charge of the chicken pen, because you're looking at China, which dominates both the production as well as the processing of most of it, if not all of it. So the next big thing is the undersea resources, the polymetallic nodules, the rare earths, and things like that. And the wonder of wonders is that the United States of America, such a big power, our key strategic partner, is not even a member of the International Seabed Authority. It cannot be, for it has not ratified the UNCLOS. So look at the contradictions there. And China, which of course observes UNCLOS more in the breach than in the observance, is very much a part of the International Seabed Authority. It's part of the acreage. Comra is all over the Indian Ocean now. Right. So please look at these things as well.
So, could I just... Yeah, just a quick one.
Very briefly, I think the more insidious part for India as we go along in multilateral fora, such as the SCO, BRICS, and some others, where China is also present, is that we are soon going to hit a genuine roadblock. We've already had some bumps there, that the Chinese are increasingly normalizing their vision, such as, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative, references to that, or the global security, cultural, that is civilizational and development initiatives, the 3 global initiatives, into the outcome documents, not just in the BRICS and SCO, but also now insidiously in the United Nations. So somewhere India will be the outlier, will not be able to go along with outcome documents and things like that. So the scope there is already very limited.
Okay. So John, last word for you. And is India a reliable partner? Can India be a reliable partner?
Look, India is obviously a reliable partner. With or without a neighborhood first policy, we are a first responder. Look at the facts over there. It was just pointed out that India came to the rescue of Sri Lanka with a bailout that amounted to US dollars 4.1 billion 3 years ago. When the Maldives had a coup in the 1980s, in 1988, it was India that had to mount, at their request, Operation Cactus. We had to send our paratroops there to actually save democratically elected government. And you also seen that in the case of the Maldives, quite apart from anything else that we do, we had to mount Operation Neer more than a decade ago when they ran out of water, drinking water. In Nepal, we have been providing assistance post-earthquake, and every time there's a natural disaster in the region, people turn to India. So India is, in fact, a very reliable partner for them. Whether they thank you for your assistance or not is a different matter. Now, the other point is about SAARC, if I may very quickly mention this. You see, Pakistan is not just an outlier as far as SAARC is concerned, because it has a tendency to question, pro bono proposals also, like a SAARC satellite, for example, and prevent something quite, innocuous as that from happening, which we had to do independently in 2017 with other like-minded countries, leaving them out. They also have a very bad tendency to bring in bilateral disputes into SAARC. What is worse, they are now using their own, membership of SAARC to try and expand it and bring the Chinese in and others in. Now, so why should we play a mug's game? It would be really stupid for us to fall into that kind of a trap. Let me also say here, the last thing we should do in our neighborhood is to harp on how similar we are. All of us have dealt with, some neighbors or the other in various capacities. And so you do not want to tell a Pakistani that we share the same culture and, we are the same people and all. So this is the last thing they want to hear. And we should keep that in mind when we are talking to the Sri Lankans or to the Nepalese or to the Maldives. Let them be what they are. They have their own identities, and let's respect that. And we have ours. To the extent we can share our, unique Indian ethos and culture, soft power with them, we should do that. One more thing. Extradition, as far as Bangladesh is concerned, keep in mind that we have an extradition treaty. It's 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And there are clauses in that provide certain exceptions. In other words, if it is politically motivated, the request for extradition, or it is not made in good faith, etc., you as India have a right to engage in further negotiations. You don't have to readily agree to anything. By the way, has it wrecked our relationship with the United States that David Coleman Headley was not extradited when we first asked for him in 2012? Has it made a difference that Tawahur Rana, another terrorist who is currently housed in a jail in Los Angeles, has not been extradited to India? We still have a strategic partnership with the United States, and we are not necessarily talking about David Headley and Tawahur Rana all the time. So why worry too much about this? We'll cross the bridge when we come to it, and we'll engage them in negotiations and see what best we can do with it.
Great, thank you.